I will never forget the sound of my crutches striking against the polished marble floor of the Denver courthouse. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting, as if announcing my return from a place everyone believed I would never leave. My name is Claire Dawson. I am 27 years old, and the moment I pushed open those heavy courtroom doors, I carried with me the weight of betrayal, pain, and a determination forged in the darkest corners of my survival. Heads turned the instant I appeared. The gallery was full, the air thick with whispers and shifting seats. But every sound died when they saw me. My body still bore the marks of what had been done to me. The crutches under my arms, the brace locked around my knee, the faint scar across my forehead where bone met wood when I fell. They had told themselves I was finished, that I would never rise again, but here I was not only alive, but standing tall, ready to speak the truth. My parents sat near the front, their postures stiff with the certainty of victory. My father, Robert, always the image of cold authority, wore his navy suit like armor, his jaw clenched in stone. My mother, Elaine, sat beside him, her eyes carefully avoiding mine, her hands folded like she was at church. And there, just a few feet away, was Sophia, my older sister, the golden child, the one they adored, the one who had tried to erase me from existence. When her eyes locked on me, her face drained of color. She whispered to herself, her lips barely moving, but I read them as clearly as if she had screamed, "Oh, my God, she is alive." She had expected silence, a world where I was buried under lies, where my voice was gone forever. But I was here. I had come to take it all back. The judge had not even entered yet, but the atmosphere was electric. Journalists shifted in their seats, pens ready, cameras discreetly raised. The weight of history pressed down on that room because everyone could sense this was not just a legal battle over money. This was about betrayal that ran deeper than any contract. I leaned heavier on my right crutch and let my gaze sweep across the room. My heart was pounding, but my voice when it came was steady. I am Claire Dawson, 27 years old, and my sister tried to kill me for $6 million. The words did not need amplification. They rolled across the room, carried on the silence. And I saw faces, pale eyes widen, even the bailiff shifted uneasily. It was the first time I had said it out loud in this place, and it carried a power I could almost taste. I thought back to the night I had been pushed the way the world spun when my body met the staircase, the crash of wood, the burst of pain, then nothing. They thought that darkness would last forever. They thought I would not return. But survival has a way of sharpening every edge of who you are. Each day I clawed back life from the coma. Each breath I fought for in that hospital bed became a weapon I carried into this moment. And now, here I was, standing in front of them, refusing to be erased. My sister lowered her eyes, her hands gripping the edge of the defense table so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father shifted in his chair, his jaw twitching. My mother raised a trembling hand to her mouth. For the first time in my life, I was not the one shrinking under their gaze. They were shrinking under mine. The bailiff called for order as murmurs rippled across the courtroom. I drew in a slow breath. This was not just about me, not just about the millions they tried to steal, not just about contracts or signatures. It was about every time I had been silenced, every time I had been told I was less, every time I had been shoved into the shadows so Sophia could shine. They had left me alone in a hospital bed, unconscious and defenseless, and they had already begun writing the story of my disappearance. But the story was mine to tell, and I was here to tell it. The shock in the room was a tide, and I let it carry me. My eyes locked once more on Sophia. She had always been the confident one, the one who laughed when others faltered, the one who wore victory like perfume. But today there was no confidence, no smile. Only the beginning of fear etched across her face. And for the first time, I realized she understood that everything was about to collapse around her. I shifted my weight on the crutches and turned toward the jury box, though they had not yet been sworn in. The wood gleamed under the bright lights, the air heavy with anticipation. My voice lowered, but carried all the more for it. They thought they could destroy me for money. They thought $6 million was worth more than my life. But I am here, and I will not be silenced. The bailiff finally announced the arrival of the judge, and the room rose, but my words still hung in the air. I could feel them vibrating in the silence like the last notes of a struck bell. The trial had not yet begun, but the battle had already shifted. They had seen me alive. They had seen me unbroken. And they would see me fight. Just a few months before that day in the courtroom, I had walked out of a glass tower in downtown Denver with the kind of smile you cannot hide, the kind that burns across your face because you know you have just crossed a finish line you once thought impossible. The late afternoon sun struck the mirrored windows, scattering light across the plaza, and I clutched a folder to my chest so tightly that my knuckles turned white. $6 million. That was the value of the contract I had just signed, $6 million in funding for the medical AI algorithm I had spent years building alone at a kitchen table lit by the pale glow of a laptop screen. I had coded through nights when the rest of the city slept, endured migraines from staring at cascading lines of code, fought off doubts that gnawed at me every time another project failed. And now I had won. A major healthcare corporation believed in my work enough to write that number on official paper, and suddenly everything I had dreamed of seemed possible. The lobby security guard offered a polite nod as I walked past, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing already, picturing how my parents would look when I told them how Sophia might for once swallow her pride and say she was proud. For years, I had been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the daughter who slipped in through the side door while her sister commanded the stage. Sophia had always been dazzling in their eyes, the confident project manager who spoke smoothly in boardrooms, who carried herself like a star. I had been the one they forgot to introduce at family dinners, the one whose small victories were brushed aside with phrases like that as "nice, dear." But Sophia has just landed a promotion. But today it was different. Today I carried proof that I was more than the shadow they had cast me in. The drive to the suburbs stretched long and winding, but I barely noticed the traffic. I rehearsed the words in my head, smiling to myself as I imagined laying the contract on the table, letting the number speak for itself. 6 million. Enough to change my future, enough to prove that years of being overlooked had forged something extraordinary. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my parents' two-story house, the sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. My chest tightened with anticipation as I stepped out of the car, folder in hand. The front door creaked as I entered, and I called out brightly, "Mom, Dad, you will not believe what just happened." But the warmth I expected never came. My mother glanced up from the kitchen counter where she was slicing vegetables, her face registering mild surprise rather than joy. My father barely looked up from the newspaper spread before him. And at the table sat Sophia, perfectly poised with a cup of coffee, her manicured nails tapping lightly against the ceramic. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hand and narrowed instantly. I held up the contract, my smile faltering only slightly. I did it. $6 million. My algorithm has been signed. Years of work, and it is finally real. I waited for the burst of pride, the congratulations, maybe even a hug. Instead, my father cleared his throat and said, "That is quite a sum. Make sure you do not squander it." My mother gave a faint nod, murmuring something about being careful with taxes. And Sophia, her lips curved not into a smile, but into a grimace, her voice sharp as glass. "Your algorithm. You mean the one I have been overseeing, the one I pushed through meetings, the one I defended to executives? Without me, you would still be tinkering in your apartment." The words stung sharper than I expected. I shook my head quickly. "No, Sophia. You know, this was my code, my research, my nights without sleep. You helped with presentations, yes, but this contract is recognition of the work I built from nothing." She stood the chair, scraping hard against the tile. "You think you are better than me now?" she hissed, stepping closer, her face inches from mine. "For years I carried you, and now you want to take all the credit." My chest tightened. This moment that was supposed to be pure triumph twisted into something sour, heavy, with the familiar weight of being diminished. I tried to explain, tried to remind her that there was enough success for both of us, but my words only fueled the fire in her eyes. My parents remained silent, their absence louder than any shouted defense. My mother stirred her pot as if nothing was happening. My father folded his paper, his gaze sliding away, refusing to meet mine. In their silence, they chose sides as they always had. I retreated slightly, clutching the contract against me like a shield, my heart racing. This was supposed to be my moment, the proof that I was worthy, that I was more than the afterthought they had always made me feel. Instead, it became another scene where Sophia's rage filled the room and I was forced to defend my very right to exist. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears that burned at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to shout to demand recognition, but a lifetime of conditioning held me back. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood room, the same posters peeling at the edges, the same bedspread faded from years of sun. The contract rested on the desk beside me, glowing faintly under the lamp. It should have felt like triumph, like vindication, but instead it felt fragile, like a treasure. I might lose if I let my guard down for even a second. Sophia's words replayed in my head, each one dripping with venom. Without me, you are nothing. My parents' silence replayed too, their refusal to defend me echoing louder than any insult. I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling the steady beat of my heart, forcing myself to remember that this victory was mine. I had built the algorithm line by line, fueled by coffee and determination, while Sophia slept comfortably. I had chased down errors, rewritten modules, presented prototypes, until my voice cracked. This contract bore my name, and no one could change that. Yet deep inside, I felt the first chill of fear, a whisper that maybe my triumph had awakened something darker in my sister. She had always been competitive, but this was different. This was rage envy sharpened into something that could cut. The next morning, I left early, unable to bear another meal in that kitchen. I carried the contract with me to a cafe downtown and stared at it again, reminding myself of its weight, its promise. Customers bustled around me laughing, chatting, carrying on with their ordinary lives while I sat frozen between triumph and dread. $6 million. It should have been pure joy, but I knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a storm that would consume everything. The days following my announcement were heavy with tension that clung to the walls of the Dawson household like humidity before a storm. I tried to focus on the excitement of my contract, on the possibilities it opened, but every interaction with Sophia turned into a contest of dominance. Her voice, sharp and calculating, cut into every conversation. She dropped remarks about how without her influence, no company would have looked twice at my work, how she had smoothed the way in meetings I would have bungled. Each word was a blade, each look a challenge. My parents did nothing to temper her. Robert sat at the head of the table silent when she belittled me, nodding when she spoke of her contributions. Elaine busied herself with plates, avoiding eye contact, her silence permission for Sophia's cruelty. One evening, the four of us sat down to dinner, the smell of roast chicken filling the air. The table was set perfectly, wine glasses reflecting the golden light of the chandelier. On the surface, it looked like any family meal, but underneath it seethed with unspoken words. I tried to share my plans for the project, to describe how the funding would be used for further development, but Sophia interrupted with a laugh that was sharp and humorless. "Do you all hear her?" she said, speaking as if this is all her doing. "Without my management, this would still be a pile of useless code." I clenched my fork tighter, forcing myself to remain calm. "That is not true," I said quietly but firmly. "I built the algorithm. I carried it for years. Your role was minor." Her eyes flashed and she leaned across the table. "Minor. Do you realize how arrogant you sound? You think sitting in front of a laptop makes you a genius. I am the reason investors listened. I am the reason doors opened." My father finally looked up from his plate. "Sophia is right," he said in that measured tone that always felt like judgment. "You should be grateful she stood by you." My breath caught. Gratitude. For being overshadowed, for being undermined. I looked at my mother silently pleading, but she lowered her eyes, cutting her chicken into tiny pieces as though if she stayed quiet the conflict would vanish. The food on my plate blurred as hot anger rushed to my face. For once, I wanted to shout to claim my place, but Sophia's voice surged louder. "You think you are better than me now, don't you? You think because of that contract you finally outrank me." I swallowed hard. This isn't about being better. It is about fairness. This was my achievement. The room seemed to vibrate with her fury. She slammed her glass onto the table wine, splashing across the white cloth. Enough, she snapped. Stop pretending you are the victim. You would be nowhere without me. Her words rang in my ears, mixing with the pounding of my pulse. My father raised a hand as if to restore order, but instead of defending me, he said, "Claire, lower your voice. You are being disrespectful." My voice broke as I answered. Disrespectful. I almost laughed at the absurdity. I am standing up for myself and you call it disrespect. Sophia pushed back her chair and stood. Her shadow loomed across the table, her posture stiff with rage. You have no idea who you are dealing with, she said. You are nothing without me, and I will prove it. The words slithered into the air, heavy with promise. The next confrontation came days later, sharper and far more dangerous. I had been working upstairs in my old room, reviewing technical notes, when I heard Sophia calling from below. Her tone was mocking her words, baiting me into another fight. I tried to ignore it, but the volume grew echoing through the halls. Finally, I stepped into the landing of the staircase folder of documents in hand. She stood at the bottom, arms, crossed eyes, glittering with venom. She began shouting accusations, claiming I had stolen her influence, that I owed her half of everything, that I was a parasite feeding off her hard work. I argued back, my voice shaking but determined. Enough, Sophia. I have had enough of you taking credit for my work, enough of you twisting everything. For once, admit this was not yours. Her face twisted, fury igniting. Admit it! The words snapped from her mouth like whips. You would not survive without me. You are weak, always weak. And then she charged up the stairs toward me, her steps loud and violent. I stepped back instinctively, my heel brushing against the edge of the step behind me. The folder trembled in my hands. She was inches away now, her face contorted with rage, her breath hot against mine. You will regret crossing me, she hissed, her hands rising not to strike, but to shove. I barely had time to register what was happening before her palms pressed hard against my shoulders. The world tilted. My body pitched backward, weightless, for a fraction of a second before gravity seized me. The stairs rose to meet me in a blur of wood and light. My head struck the edge with a sound that split the silence, white pain exploding across my skull. My limbs flailed, documents scattering like startled birds. The air was torn from my lungs as my back collided with each step, my knee twisting at an unnatural angle, a scream dying in my throat. Then darkness. I do not know how long I was gone. Moments or minutes, it made no difference. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling swam above me, tilted and blurred. My body throbbed with agony, my leg a fiery spear of pain, my head pounding in waves that made the world spin. A copper tang filled my mouth, and I realized dimly that blood was trickling down my temple. My sister's figure loomed above me, her chest heaving, her face frozen in an expression of satisfaction quickly masked as concern. For a flicker, she looked triumphant. Then she bent down and whispered, "Maybe you will learn to stay out of my way." Voices echoed faintly. My parents rushed into the hall, their footsteps quick but not frantic. My mother gasped softly, covering her mouth. My father frowned but did not move closer. She fell. Sophia said, her voice quick and sharp, rehearsed in an instant. She fell down the stairs. I tried to stop her. I wanted to cry out to tell them the truth, but the words tangled in my throat. My father shook his head. Disappointment etched across his face. Always careless, Claire. My mother whispered something I could barely hear. She'll survive. Or maybe not. My vision blurred as the edges of consciousness slipped away. The last thing I felt was the weight of their indifference pressing harder than the pain in my broken body. When the paramedics arrived, the siren cut through the night, but by then I was drifting far from their voices. The stretcher lifted me, the lights above the hall flickered past, and everything dissolved into darkness once again. When consciousness returned, it was like rising through thick water. Sounds reached me first, muffled at the edges, then growing clearer. A steady beeping marked the rhythm of my heart. The faint whoosh of machines breathed for me. Sterile air stung my nostrils sharp with antiseptic. My eyelids felt heavy, glued together, but eventually I pried them open. The ceiling above me was pale, unfamiliar, speckled with dots of fluorescent light. For a moment, I did not know where I was. Then pain seared through me and memory came crashing back. The staircase, the fall. Sophia's face twisted in rage. My body jerked at the thought, but pain chained me down again. A voice floated to me soft yet startled. "You are awake." A nurse leaned over her eyes, kind though guarded. Relief softened her features. "You gave us quite a scare. You have been here for 2 weeks." The words hit me like a blow. 2 weeks. I had lost 14 days to darkness. 14 days erased. My throat rasped when I tried to speak. "My family, have they been here?" The nurse's mouth pressed into a thin line. "No one. They called once your parents, but no visits." I swallowed hard, my throat aching. "And my sister." The nurse hesitated, glancing at the chart before answering. "No." Silence expanded around me, heavy and suffocating. The people who should have been by my side had left me abandoned. My chest tightened not just from the injury, but from the betrayal sharper than any wound. The nurse added gently, "They said you brought this on yourself, that you embarrassed them." Her eyes flickered with pity but also with unease, as if she should not have repeated it. The words carved deep into me, deeper than the bruises modeling my body. For days I lay in that bed, staring at the sterile white walls, listening to the machines that seemed more loyal to me than my own blood. The ache in my head was relentless, my leg bound in a brace that kept me immobile. Nurses came and went, their footsteps blending into the hum of the hospital. But no familiar faces crossed the threshold. I kept waiting foolishly, hoping that my mother would appear with a bouquet, that my father would finally show concern, that Sophia would confess in some twist of remorse. The door never opened for them. The absence became louder than their presence had ever been. Time dragged like a slow river. I counted the hours by the meals delivered on plastic trays, by the shifting patterns of sunlight across the blinds. My mind replayed the night of the fall in fragments that made my stomach twist. Her hands against my shoulders, the sudden weightlessness, the thundering crash. And always the look on her face, that flash of satisfaction before she masked it. I knew it then with certainty. She had not stumbled, had not slipped. She had pushed me deliberately. One afternoon, as the ward quieted after visiting hours, the door creaked open. My pulse jumped, foolish hope rising, but it was Sophia who entered. Not with concern, but with something colder. She stood at the foot of my bed, arms folded, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Still clinging to life, huh?" Her words were sharp, designed to wound. "You are holding everyone back, you know." The machine beside me beeped faster, betraying my agitation. My voice cracked as I asked, "Why are you here?" She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, her eyes glinting with malice. "Just making sure you stay out of my way." She straightened, turned on her heel, and walked out, her heels clicking on the tile. Her visit left me shaken fury, warring with helplessness. I clenched the sheet until my knuckles whitened, anger simmering beneath the surface. She had nearly ended my life, and now she dared to taunt me. And my parents, I realized bitterly, were nowhere to defend me. Their absence was not negligence. It was choice. Nights were the hardest. The hospital quieted, shadows stretching long across the room. Machines blinked in steady rhythm, but the silence between their beeps was cavernous. Alone in the dark, I replayed every moment of childhood when Sophia had taken what was mine. The doll she snatched and claimed as hers, the bigger bedroom she demanded while I was left with the cramped one, the science fair ribbon my parents ignored in favor of praising her sketch. Each memory stacked atop the next until I saw the pattern clearly. She had always been reaching, always grasping for more, and now she had tried to grasp the ultimate prize, erasing me entirely so nothing would stand in her way. My body ached, but my mind grew sharper with each passing day. The betrayal of my parents settled like a stone in my chest. I had excused their favoritism for years, telling myself they did not mean harm, that I simply had to work harder to earn their approval. But lying in that bed abandoned when I needed them most stripped me of illusions. They had chosen her. They would always choose her. And if I did not fight back, she would take everything. Another week passed before a different face appeared at my door. Hannah, my best friend since college, the one person I trusted completely. She slipped inside, her eyes brimming with relief and worry. Claire. She hurried to my side, grasping my hand carefully so as not to jar the IV line. I have been fighting to get in here. They kept saying no visitors. Her voice cracked. I thought I might never see you again. Tears pricked my eyes for the first time since waking. Her presence was a lifeline in the sea of isolation. She leaned close, lowering her voice. You need to know something. Sophia has been talking at work. She is telling everyone she is taking over your $6 million contract, acting like it was hers all along. My stomach churned, my greatest triumph, the proof of my worth, twisted into her prize. Hannah continued her words taut with disgust. She is saying you are done, that you will not recover, that the contract is safer in her hands. Rage flooded me hot and consuming. It was not enough that she had tried to end me. Now she was trying to steal my legacy. That night, I pulled the hospital tablet closer, fumbling with stiff fingers to check my accounts. A flashing red alert appeared. Account frozen. Panic surged. I called the bank, my voice shaking as I explained. The representative's response chilled me. There is a court order freezing your funds. Concerns about your ability to manage them given your condition. My breath caught. Ability. As if 2 weeks in a coma made me incompetent. As if my sister's lies had already been written into law. I set the tablet aside, my body trembling. The pieces began to fit together. Sophia's smug words, her boasts at work, the frozen account. This was more than abandonment. This was an orchestrated plan. She had not only tried to break me physically, she was erasing me legally, financially, professionally. The fluorescent light buzzed above me cold and relentless, and I lay staring at the ceiling. I felt the weight of betrayal heavier than any cast or brace. But beneath it, something stirred. Anger sharpened into resolve. If they thought I would remain silent, broken, and erased, they were wrong. I would find a way to fight. The day after I discovered my bank account frozen, the hospital door opened to reveal a stranger in a charcoal suit carrying a thick folder. He was tall, with calm eyes that studied me with both professionalism and quiet sympathy. Claire Dawson, he asked. I nodded warily. He extended his hand. My name is Mark Taylor. I am an attorney. I think you are in danger of losing far more than money. The weight of his words pressed heavier than the brace on my leg. He sat beside my bed, placing the folder carefully on the table, and slid a stack of papers toward me. I picked them up with trembling fingers. Each page bore legal seal's signature stamps. My eyes widened as I scanned the lines. They declared me incapacitated, unfit to manage my own affairs, granting temporary guardianship to Sophia Dawson. At the bottom of each page was a signature meant to be mine, but it was not. The strokes were clumsy imitations, my name twisted into a lie. My voice broke when I whispered I never signed these. Mark's face was grim. I know. A colleague at your company worried when you disappeared. They hired me to look into it. That is how I found these filings. They were rushed through, supported by medical records that claim you may never recover. My chest tightened. Medical records. The nurse's hesitancy, the silence around my condition, it all clicked into place. Someone had painted me as permanently incapacitated. Mark flipped to another page. Your financial accounts were frozen under this order, and your contract. He tapped the document was transferred to your sister as acting guardian. My heart hammered in disbelief and rage. Everything I had built was being siphoned away while I lay unconscious. That afternoon, Dr. Evelyn Price entered my room, her expression serious. She was the attending physician who had overseen my recovery, a woman with steady eyes and an unshakable presence. Claire, she said gently, I reviewed your file after a request came from the court. Something troubled me. She pulled a tablet from her bag, scrolling until she found the entries. See here. These notes claim you were kept under heavy sedation for weeks with severe neurological impairment. None of it is true. I never authorized these entries. Someone tampered with your medical records. The world tilted. It was one thing to be pushed, abandoned, stripped of finances. But this altering medical records was an attempt to erase my very capacity to exist in the eyes of the law. Dr. Price's voice hardened. Whoever did this wanted to make sure you would never be considered competent. That is why the guardianship order passed so quickly. I felt sick. Sophia's face flashed in my mind, smug in the hospital, telling me to stay out of her way. It was all part of her plan. That evening, Hannah returned her loyalty, a constant thread in the unraveling mess. She hugged me gently, careful of the IV. I have to tell you what I learned, she whispered urgently. At work, Sophia is parading as the savior of your project. She tells executives you are incapacitated, that she has stepped up to secure the contract. She is convincing people that she alone is responsible for your algorithm. Hannah's jaw tightened. I heard her bragging that the funding is safe in her hands now. I clenched the sheet, my nails biting into the fabric. Anger surged so fiercely it cut through the fog of pain. She had pushed me down the stairs and walked away unpunished. She had left me abandoned in this bed, and now she was forging papers, altering records, stealing everything I had built. The fury was almost cleansing. It sharpened my mind, reminded me of who I was before the fall. Not weak, not broken. A woman who had survived nights of code failures, doubts, and risen to secure $6 million with nothing but determination. Mark leaned forward, his voice steady but low. We will need evidence. The forged signatures, the altered records, your testimony. We can fight this, but it will not be easy. They will argue you are fragile, that you are confused. We have to be stronger. Dr. Price nodded firmly. I will testify. I will document every discrepancy. No one erases my patient's truth. Hannah squeezed my hand. And I will find proof at the company. Emails, messages, anything that shows she claimed your work. The alliance forming around me lit a fire in my chest. For so long, I had faced my family alone, their favoritism crushing me under Sophia's shadow. But now, I had allies who believed me, who would not look away. It was the beginning of something new. That night, as the machines hummed and the ward quieted, I stared at the ceiling and let memories flood. Childhood birthdays where Sophia blew out my candles, family trips where she commandeered the best seat while I was left behind dinners, where my accomplishments were dismissed with a shrug. Every moment was a stone added to the mountain of resentment she carried, and now she had tried to bury me beneath it, but she had underestimated me. The next morning, I asked for my discharge. The nurse protested, saying I was not yet strong enough, but strength is not always measured in healed bones. Sometimes it is measured in will. I needed out of that sterile cage. I needed to breathe air not tinged with antiseptic to move forward. Mark arranged a temporary apartment downtown where I could recover safely. Hannah brought me clothes, her arms full of fresh hope. Before I left, Dr. Price pressed the tablet into my hands. Keep this. It contains copies of your records, the false entries, and my annotations. Do not let them tell you who you are. I met her gaze, gratitude swelling. Thank you for seeing me. She squeezed my shoulder. No one should fight alone. As I was wheeled through the hospital corridors, I saw families gathered around patients' laughter and concern mingling. My heart ached at the contrast. I had none of that, but I had something else now. Truth, allies, and the burning resolve to fight. When I reached the car waiting outside, I paused for one last glance at the hospital that had been my cage. My reflection in the window looked pale, scarred, and fragile. But behind my eyes there was steel. I whispered to myself, Sophia thinks she has won. She has no idea what is coming. The first night in the downtown apartment was both liberating and terrifying. The walls were bare, the air still carried the scent of fresh paint, and the silence was different from the hospital silence. There it had been sterile, suffocating. Here, it was wide open like the hush before a storm. I set my crutches against the couch, lowering myself carefully, every movement tugging at bruises and the brace around my leg. Pain flared, but beneath it simmered something new. Anger had transformed into determination, sharp and focused. Sophia had thought she finished me, that she could rewrite my life on paper and walk away triumphant. She was about to learn I was not so easy to erase. Mark came by the next morning carrying a briefcase, his calm professionalism a steady anchor. "We have to be strategic, Claire. If we rush, they will paint you as unstable desperate. We need undeniable evidence." I nodded, gripping the armrest to steady myself. "I already have an idea. Sophia's arrogance is her weakness. She likes to brag. If I can get her talking, she will incriminate herself." Mark's brow furrowed, but then he gave a slow nod. "Record her. Colorado law is on your side. Just be careful." That evening, I called Sophia, forcing my voice into something casual, though my heart pounded. "Can we meet?" I said. "We need to talk about the contract." There was a pause on the line. Then her cool voice replied, "Tomorrow. Cafe near Union Station. Noon." She hung up before I could say more. The next day, I limped into the cafe recorder hidden in my pocket, heart racing so loud I thought it might give me away. Sophia was already there, sitting with perfect posture, a coffee steaming in front of her. She looked up, her eyes sweeping over the brace on my leg, the crutches. "Well, well, you are still alive." Her smirk was venomous. I forced a smile. Barely. "But I wanted to ask how things are going at work." She leaned back, swirling her spoon lazily. "The contract is moving forward," she said smoothly. "Someone had to step up while you were incapacitated." My fingers tightened around the recorder. "You mean my contract?" She laughed, cold and dismissive. "It is mine now. You were never going to make it happen from a hospital bed." Each word dropped like a stone into the recorder, evidence carved in her own arrogance. I clenched my jaw to stop myself from lashing out then and there. Instead, I nodded, playing along, even managing a faint chuckle. "Good for you, Sophia." She leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Better get used to it. You are out." Back at the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, replaying the recording with trembling hands. Her voice filled the room, smug and damning. Proof. My first weapon. Mark listened intently, his lips curling into a rare smile. "This is gold. With this, plus the forged signatures and altered records, we are building a strong case." But we needed more. Hannah took it upon herself to dig through company chatter. Days later, she burst into the apartment laptop under her arm. "Look at this." She showed me a string of internal emails. In one, Sophia wrote to the CEO. "With Claire gone, I am stepping in to replace her. The project is in good hands." Another email bragged about her vision for the algorithm as though I had never existed. My stomach twisted, but my resolve hardened. She was burying me in lies. But now we had her words in writing. Still, Mark pushed for further evidence. "Money trails," he said. "People do not commit fraud without leaving footprints." He introduced me to a private investigator, a sharp woman named Carla who carried herself with no-nonsense efficiency. Within a week, she returned with a stack of bank statements. She pointed to a series of transfers from Sophia's account. Large sums wired to a colleague at the company, a man who had always seemed too eager to please her. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. "She is paying him," Carla said flatly. "Likely to forge documents and bolster her claim." My blood boiled. Not only was Sophia stealing my work, she was bribing others to rewrite history. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. Each fragment revealed how deep her scheme ran. The forged guardianship papers, the altered medical records, the frozen accounts, the corporate emails, the bribed colleague. It was not just sibling rivalry. It was conspiracy calculated and ruthless. At night, lying on the couch staring at the ceiling, I thought about every insult, every dismissal, every time my parents praised Sophia while ignoring me. This was the culmination of years of control. She had been testing boundaries since childhood, and now she had escalated to attempted erasure. But what she did not realize was that the very traits she mocked in me, the patience, the quiet persistence, the refusal to give up, were the ones arming me now. One evening, Hannah and I sat by the window, city lights blinking below. She looked at me, her eyes fierce. "You have to be careful, Claire. She is dangerous." I met her gaze. "I know, but she is also careless. She thinks she has already won. That arrogance will undo her." The next morning I called Mark. "I am ready." He paused. "Ready for what?" "Ready to take her on." "In court." His voice was measured. "We still need to tighten our case, but I hear you, and we will get there." I ended the call and stood at the window, gripping the crutch tight. For the first time since the fall, I felt not just like a survivor, but like a fighter. Sophia had thought she silenced me with one shove. Instead, she had awakened something she could not control. The battle was coming, and I would not face it alone. The apartment became less of a place to heal and more of a war room. Stacks of documents grew across the coffee table, sticky notes in bright colors clung to folders, and the hum of Hannah's laptop filled the silence most nights. I shuffled between the couch and the small desk crutches tucked under my arms, determination replacing the exhaustion that had haunted me in the hospital. Pain still throbbed in my leg with every step, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. For the first time since the fall, I carried something stronger than fear. I carried purpose. Mark stopped by every evening after work, his briefcase bulging with files. He set them down carefully, his movements deliberate, his voice steady. "Each piece matters," he told me. "One recording, one email, one bank transfer, it all builds the story. And stories win trials." He tapped a folder marked Exhibit A. "Your sister built her case on lies. We will bury her in truth." Dr. Evelyn visited once a week, her presence calm and grounding. She brought updated medical logs, copies of scans, her annotations proving which entries were authentic and which had been tampered with. Every false note became another nail in the coffin of Sophia's defense. She looked at me across the table one evening, her eyes unwavering. "I want you to know, Claire, that you were never as close to death as those falsified records claimed. You fought hard, and you recovered because of your own strength." She paused, lowering her voice. "But someone wanted you to believe you were beyond saving. That will not stand in my hospital." Her words pierced deeper than she realized. "Because in my family that was always the message, that I was never enough, never worthy, always in Sophia's shadow." The fight ahead was not just about contracts or money. It was about reclaiming every moment I had been diminished. Late one night, while Hannah pored over emails, I drifted back into memories that surfaced like ghosts. Childhood afternoons where Sophia seized the toys I loved most, parading them as if they were hers. I had cried to my parents, but Robert had chuckled and said, "She is just being assertive, Claire. You should learn from her." At 10, when I begged to join a science camp, the money had gone to Sophia's art lessons instead. My mother had stroked my hair and murmured, "Your sister has more promise in the creative fields." At 15, when I won first place at the state science fair, Sophia staged a dramatic piano performance at home that same evening. My parents clapped until their palms reddened for her. For me, they offered a distracted smile. Those moments had carved deep scars, teaching me to chase recognition through relentless work to prove myself in silence. And now, decades later, Sophia had tried to snuff out even that proof. I looked across the table at Hannah, who was scrolling furiously. She glanced up, catching the heaviness in my eyes. "She has been doing this to you forever, hasn't she?" I nodded slowly. "Always." And they let her. They wanted her to shine, even if it meant I disappeared. Hannah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then, this fight is not just about the 6 million. It is about every single time they told you that you did not matter." The following week, Carla the investigator returned with a thicker file. She laid out evidence like cards in a poker game. Payments Sophia sent to Mark, the client-colleague dates matching the forged documents at the company. Emails where Sophia gave instructions in careful coded language. Cross-referenced with the corporate calendars, it revealed a pattern of collusion. Carla's eyes glittered. They were sloppy. She thought throwing money around would cover her tracks. It just made them easier to follow. Piece by piece, the case tightened. Mark created timelines on whiteboard's arrows connecting bank transfers to altered records to court filings. He walked me through each one. "When we present this, the judge will see a pattern of deliberate deception. And when your sister takes the stand, her own words will trap her. But gathering evidence was only one part of preparation. I had to prepare myself, to relive the fall in detail, to describe the emptiness of waking alone, to stare down the people who had chosen to abandon me. Some nights, the thought left me trembling, my chest constricting until I could barely breathe. Hannah sat with me through those moments, reading the transcripts aloud, letting me practice telling my story until my voice steadied. She said, "The truth is your weapon. It is also your shield." The weight of family history loomed in every rehearsal. My father's stern gaze, my mother's averted eyes, Sophia's triumphant smirk. I would face them all in that courtroom, not just as legal opponents, but as ghosts of every rejection I had ever endured. Yet each time I faltered, I pictured the moment I had walked into the courthouse on crutches, the silence when they realized I was alive. That power returned to me, reminding me why I had to fight. Weeks passed in that rhythm of preparation. By day, we collected evidence, cross-checked timelines, built strategies. By night, I rehearsed my testimony, turning pain into clarity. Each morning when I rose, the city skyline outside the apartment gleamed like a promise that the future was still mine to claim. On the eve of filing the lawsuit, Mark gathered us in the apartment. He spread the evidence across the table one final time. The cafe recording where Sophia claimed the contract as hers, the falsified guardianship documents, the medical records annotated by Dr. Evelyn, the bank transfers Carla had traced to the company emails Hannah had uncovered. It was a mosaic of betrayal, but also a map to justice. Mark's voice was steady. "Tomorrow we file. Once this enters the court, there is no turning back." I felt the air shift heavy with anticipation. I thought of Sophia so certain of her control. I thought of my parents so comfortable in their silence. And I thought of myself once the quiet girl in the corner, now about to stand at the center of a storm. I drew in a breath and said firmly, "Let's do it." That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories and fears colliding. But beneath it all ran a current of strength I had never felt before. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had created someone who refused to be erased. The dawn came, pale light spilling through the blinds. I rose slowly, bracing against the ache in my leg, and prepared for the day that would mark the true beginning of the fight. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where history lingered in the walls. When I entered with Mark at my side, the hallway buzzed with voices. Lawyers in suits, journalists clutching notebooks, the murmur of anticipation thick in the air. My crutches clicked against the marble floor, with every step a reminder of the scars Sophia had left on me, but also a steady rhythm of defiance. People turned as I passed, whispers rising. "That's her. That's the sister who came back." I kept my head high, forcing each step to carry not just my weight, but the story I was about to tell. The courtroom was already crowded when we arrived. The gallery seats were full, reporters pressed close eyes, glinting with hunger for scandal. At the defense table sat Sophia, flawless as ever, her hair sleek, her blouse crisp, her posture regal. But I saw it, the tightness at her jaw, the way her fingers twisted a pen until it clicked repeatedly. Beside her, Robert and Elaine sat stiffly, their faces pale but composed. They looked like they were attending a funeral rather than a trial, perhaps, because in a way they were the burial of their illusions, the end of the world where Sophia always won. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Martinez entered, her black robe flowing as she took the bench. She was known for her sharp eye and no-nonsense demeanor. As everyone settled, Mark leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Truth will do the work." I nodded, though my pulse thundered in my ears. The proceedings began with formalities. Then Mark stood, his voice resonant. "Your Honor, this is not just a case about financial fraud. It is a case about betrayal, about deliberate attempts to erase a woman's life and work. My client, Claire Dawson, stands before you not because she is weak, but because her own sister sought to make her powerless." He gestured toward me, and for a moment the entire room's attention pinned me in place. I steadied myself, refusing to shrink. The judge gave a curt nod. "Proceed." Mark clicked a remote and the speakers crackled to life. The cafe recording filled the room. Sophia's voice rang out clear and smug. "It's mine now. You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Sophia's head jerked up, her face blanching. She whispered furiously to her attorney, but the damage was done. The sound of her arrogance was undeniable, her words a dagger turned back on herself. Mark did not pause. He flipped open a folder and handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. These, he said, are the guardianship documents filed to strip Claire Dawson of her rights. The signatures are forged. My client never signed these. The judge examined them, her brow furrowed. We have handwriting experts prepared to testify, Mark added. Next came the medical records. Dr. Evelyn took the stand, her presence calm but commanding. She held up charts pointing to entries. These notes claim extended sedation and severe neurological impairment. They are false. I never authorized them. Someone altered this file to exaggerate Ms. Dawson's condition. Judge Martinez leaned forward, her expression darkening. Are you saying this was intentional? Dr. Evelyn's voice was steady. Without doubt. The defense attorney rose, attempting to discredit her. Doctor, is it possible these were clerical errors? Dr. Evelyn's eyes flashed. Clerical errors do not conveniently paint a patient as permanently incapacitated. This was deliberate. Her words hung heavy, and I felt a spark of vindication. Mark pressed on. He introduced the bank statements Carla had uncovered. Payments from Sophia's account to Mark Laird, a colleague at the company. The amounts were significant, timed precisely with forged documents elevating Sophia as the project lead. The investigator testified crisply, laying out the pattern. The defense tried to object, but the evidence was undeniable. The money trail glowed like neon, leading straight to Sophia's door. Then Hannah was called. She clutched the rail of the witness stand, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength as she described the emails Sophia had sent to executives. With Claire out, I am stepping in. The project is in good hands. Another email read aloud. My vision for the algorithm ensures success. Hannah's voice cracked. She erased Claire from her own creation. The gallery buzzed with outrage. Through it all, Sophia sat rigid, her mask of confidence cracking. She tried to glare at me, but her eyes wavered. She looked less like the flawless sister my parents had idolized and more like a cornered animal. Finally, Mark clicked the remote again. The courtroom fell silent as a grainy video appeared on the screen. The security footage from the night of the fall. The staircase glowed under dim light. My figure appeared at the top, holding a folder. Sophia stormed up, her hands shoving hard against my shoulders. My body pitched backward, tumbling down papers, scattering. Gasps erupted. Someone in the gallery cried out. The video froze on Sophia standing above me, her expression unmistakable. Sophia lurched to her feet. That's not what happened. She shoved the air, her voice desperate. She tried to spin, to claim it was an accident, that she had reached to steady me, but the image spoke louder than her protests. The jury leaned forward, their faces hard. The judge rapped her gavel. Order! Order in the court! I sat, frozen breath caught in my chest, watching the truth finally unveiled. For weeks I had relived that night in my head, doubting myself, haunted by her smirk. Now the world could see it. She had not just stolen my work. She had tried to erase me entirely. The defense scrambled, calling Sophia to testify. She took the stand, her composure brittle. She spoke quickly, claiming she had only been protecting the company, that I was unstable, that I had fallen by accident. But under cross-examination, Mark's questions cut into her story like blades. If you were protecting her, why did you file documents declaring her incapacitated? Why did you accept payments into your personal account? Why did you brag in emails that the project was yours? Each question unraveled her further. Her voice faltered. Her answers twisted contradictions piling until even her own attorney looked weary. When she stepped down, shoulders trembling, she was no longer the golden sister. She was exposed. Then it was my turn. My crutches clicked as I made my way to the stand, the entire room watching. I swore to tell the truth, my hand trembling only slightly. Mark guided me with gentle questions. I told the story from the beginning, the nights spent coding the triumph of the contract, the confrontation on the staircase. My voice cracked as I described waking in the hospital alone, abandoned. I felt the sting of tears, but pressed on describing the frozen bank accounts, the forged papers, the altered records. I looked at Sophia, then her eyes red-rimmed, and said firmly, "You thought I would stay silent. You thought I would disappear. But I am here." The courtroom was hushed, the weight of my words sinking in. My parents sat in the gallery, their faces stricken. My mother clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles blanched. My father's jaw hung slack, his authority shattered. For the first time, they looked small complicit in the silence that had enabled Sophia. When I stepped down, my legs trembled not just from injury, but from release. I had spoken my truth. The rest was in the hands of the court. Mark delivered his closing argument with quiet power. This case is about more than money. It is about the right of one woman to claim her life, her work, her identity. It is about betrayal by blood, about lies layered on lies, until truth was nearly buried. But truth survived. Claire Dawson survived. And now justice must follow. The judge called for recess before deliberation. As the gavel struck, Sophia collapsed into her chair, her body folding, her shoulders shaking. The mask had shattered completely. The woman who once carried herself with invincible confidence now sat broken in front of all. I leaned on my crutches watching. For years, I had been the one diminished, the one overlooked. Today, the roles had reversed. The gallery murmured as people rose, some casting sympathetic glances at me, others staring at Sophia with open disdain. The tide had turned. I whispered to myself, almost too soft to hear, "It's over." But deep down, I knew the verdict still awaited. The battle had been fought, but the war would be sealed only when the judge spoke the final words. The recess stretched like an eternity. I waited in the quiet of the courthouse corridor, leaning against the wall with my crutches beside me, every muscle in my body taut. Hannah sat nearby, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her presence steadying. Mark paced slowly, murmuring thoughts about the strength of our case, but his eyes betrayed the same tension I felt. Dr. Evelyn reviewed her notes, her calm expression unshaken. Carla, the investigator, leaned back in her chair. Arms crossed, her gaze sharp. We were all waiting for the same moment, the verdict that would determine whether everything we had fought for would stand. When the bailiff finally called us back, my stomach churned. The courtroom felt heavier now, the air thicker with expectation. The jury filed in, faces unreadable, each step deliberate. Sophia sat at the defense table, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. She clutched a tissue in her hand, twisting it until it tore. My parents sat just behind her. Robert, stiff and silent, Elaine trembling, her lips pressed into a thin line. They looked like statues cracked by time, the weight of complicity pressing down on them. Judge Martinez entered, and the room rose. When she settled, her gaze swept across the courtroom, sharp and unblinking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, a folded sheet of paper in hand. "Yes, Your Honor." My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the words as the verdict was passed to the bailiff, then to the judge. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning, and then she spoke. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Sophia Dawson, guilty." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia flinched, her tissue dropping from her hand. "On the charge of forgery, guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment resulting in grievous bodily harm, guilty." Each word struck like a hammer, sealing the fate she had tried so desperately to avoid. I gripped my crutches tighter, forcing myself to stay upright. The judge's voice was firm, resonant with authority. "Sophia Dawson, you orchestrated a calculated scheme to deprive your sister of her intellectual property and her financial rights. You falsified documents, tampered with medical records, bribed colleagues, and left her for dead. The evidence against you is overwhelming. For these crimes, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, with restitution of $500,000 to be paid to Claire Dawson for damages incurred." Sophia's face crumpled, her confident mask gone entirely. She gasped, shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, please. I was protecting the company. I was protecting us." Her voice cracked, desperate, but the words sounded hollow, flimsy against the mountain of evidence. The gallery murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering harshly. She collapsed back into her chair, her sobs sharp in the silence. Mark Laird, the colleague who had accepted her payments, was called next. His hands trembled as he stood, his face gray. The judge's voice did not waver. You accepted bribes to falsify documents betraying the integrity of your profession. For your role, you are sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined $20,000. He sagged visibly, his knees buckling as he was led away by deputies. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. The judge's gaze shifted toward my parents. Robert Dawson and Elaine Dawson, while not criminally charged in this proceeding, your role as enablers in this scheme cannot be ignored. Your silence in the face of your daughter's crimes, your willingness to allow her to control and manipulate directly, contributed to the harm suffered by Claire Dawson. This court rules that you are liable in civil damages of $150,000 to the plaintiff. My mother gasped aloud, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face drained of color, his jaw slack. For a man who had always projected authority, the blow was crushing. They looked suddenly old, diminished, stripped of the superiority they had wielded for so long. The gallery erupted in whispers again, some voices sharp with condemnation. I stood frozen, the words washing over me. For so long I had believed their silence was immovable, their favoritism unshakable. But here in the cold light of justice, even they were held accountable. The weight of years of neglect, dismissal, and betrayal lifted slightly from my chest. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. This court is adjourned. The sound reverberated through the room, marking the end of a battle that had consumed months, years, perhaps my whole life. Sophia was led away first, her wrists bound in cuffs, her sobs echoing as she stumbled. She turned her head, once her eyes locking on mine, filled not with hatred but with something hollow, broken. For the first time, she looked small, powerless. The deputies guided her out the heavy door, closing behind them. Mark Laird followed his head, bowed his shoulders, hunched. He did not look back. My parents lingered, standing slowly, their faces pale. My mother whispered my name, her voice trembling. Claire. I turned my head slightly, but I said nothing. Robert's lips pressed into a thin line, his authority shattered. They shuffled out their steps unsteady, the gallery watching with thinly veiled judgment. I remained seated, gripping the handles of my crutches. My heart pounded, but it was different now. Not fear, not dread. Relief. Vindication. Hannah rushed to my side, her eyes brimming with tears. You did it, she whispered fiercely. You won. I shook my head slowly. We did it. Mark approached, his expression solemn, but his eyes bright with quiet triumph. Justice was served today. Dr. Evelyn smiled softly, her presence steady as ever. No one could take away your voice, Claire. You proved it. The journalists swarmed the steps outside as we exited. Flashbulbs popped, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. Claire, how do you feel? Claire, do you have a message for your sister? Claire, what is next for you? I paused at the top of the stairs, the courthouse looming behind me, the city sprawling ahead. I adjusted my grip on the crutches, my body aching, but my spirit steady. How do I feel? I feel alive. I feel free. I feel like no one can silence me again. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment. Then I turned and walked slowly down the steps. Each movement deliberate, the sound of my crutches echoing like victory. That night alone in the apartment, I sat by the window overlooking the city lights. The verdict echoed in my mind not as noise, but as a steady reassurance. 12 years. Restitution. Civil damages. Consequences had been real, public, undeniable. The family that had once controlled me had been exposed, their power stripped. I thought back to the girl who had lain in a hospital bed, abandoned and voiceless. She had seemed so fragile then, but she had become me and I had risen. Sophia would spend years behind bars, her ambition reduced to a cage. Mark Laird would learn the weight of his betrayal from a cell. My parents would live with the stain of their complicity, their reputations crumbling. And me, I had my name restored, my work reclaimed, and my future wide open. I whispered into the night, steady and certain. They thought they could erase me, but I am still here. the city lights glittered back like silent witnesses to the truth that had finally prevailed. The first morning after the trial, I woke not to the sound of machines beeping or the tense shuffle of lawyers, but to the quiet hum of the city below my apartment. For a long while, I lay still staring at the ceiling, letting the silence wash over me. My body still ached, the brace on my leg, the scars on my forehead, the stiffness in my back, but there was something different now. The heaviness that had pressed down on me since the night of the fall had lifted. Justice had been spoken out loud, and it had echoed far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The newspaper headlines arrived before breakfast, delivered digitally and printed in bold "Sister sentenced in $6 million betrayal." Another read, "Family falls apart in Denver courtroom." I scrolled through them with a strange detachment. For once, my name was not buried in the shadow of Sophia's. It was mine. Claire Dawson. Survivor. Innovator. Woman who refused to disappear. But I also felt a deep exhaustion. Winning had cost me more than I realized. My sister was behind bars. My parents had been exposed. My childhood family unit, fractured for years, was now irreparably shattered. There would be no going back to dinners under the chandelier, no chance of reconciliation. I had cut that rope the moment I chose to fight. And strangely, I did not mourn it. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the steam curling upward, and whispered to myself, I don't need their approval anymore. I am enough. The weeks that followed were filled with practicalities. Restitution payments began, though the money meant less to me than the principal. Sophia's assets were seized to cover part of the $500,000 she owed. Mark Laird's fine was processed. My parents begrudgingly sold off part of their retirement property to pay the civil damages. Their community whispered about them, once respected figures now branded as complicit. For years, I had been the invisible one. Now their shame was visible in every corner of their lives. I returned slowly to work on my algorithm. Sitting at my desk code, scrolling across the screen, I felt the familiar rhythm of creation. But something inside me had changed. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about what I could do with it, how I could use my success to help others who had been silenced, who had been abandoned like me. One evening, Hannah joined me at the apartment. She placed a thick folder on the table. What if we start something bigger? She said. A foundation. For victims of family abuse, for people betrayed by those who were supposed to love them. I stared at her, the idea sparking instantly. We could provide legal aid, counseling, safe housing. Everything I wished I had when I woke up in that hospital bed alone. My chest swelled with conviction. Let's do it. Within months, the Claire Dawson Foundation was born. I invested $500,000 from my recovered contract earnings to launch it. At the opening event, I stood before a small crowd in a Denver community center. The banner behind me read, "No one should fight alone." My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. I know what it is to wake up abandoned, to hear your own parents say you brought this on yourself. I know what it is to be erased by lies. But I also know what it is to fight back. And that is what this foundation stands for, turning pain into power, giving others the tools to rise. Applause filled the room, and for once, it was not for Sophia. It was for me. For the girl who had been pushed aside, but who had chosen to stand. Not long after I moved into a new apartment, a space filled with light, with wide windows overlooking the city skyline. I furnished it simply but warmly, bookshelves lined with technical manuals and novels, photographs of Hannah and me laughing, a framed certificate from the foundation's registration. There were no family portraits, no reminders of a past I no longer needed. On the balcony one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city gold, I reflected on the journey. I thought of Sophia in a cell miles away, her world reduced to cold walls and metal bars. I thought of my parents, their pride, stripped, their voices hushed in the community that once praised them. And I thought of myself not as a victim, but as a survivor who had turned betrayal into a beacon for others. Sometimes people asked me if I regretted cutting ties completely, if I ever wanted reconciliation. My answer was always the same. You cannot heal in the place that broke you. My healing began the moment I stopped chasing their love and chose to love myself enough to walk away. The scars remained on my body, on my heart, but they no longer defined me. They reminded me of what I had survived, of the strength I carried. and they became part of the story I now told through the foundation through the lives we touched. Each time we funded legal counsel for a victim, each time we placed someone in safe housing, each time a survivor found their voice again, I felt a piece of my own soul knit back together. Years later, the city skyline remained my constant companion. I stood on the rooftop terrace one night, the wind cool against my skin, the lights shimmering like stars scattered across the ground. I whispered the words that had carried me through the darkest nights: I am enough. For the first time in my life, I believed them fully. When I look back on everything that happened the fall, the hospital, the forged papers, the coldness of my own family in that courtroom, I realize the real story is not just about betrayal. It is about survival and about the choice to stand even when standing feels impossible. I often ask myself, what does it mean to survive something like this? Is it simply about being alive, breathing, moving forward? Or is it about finding meaning in the wreckage, about turning pain into something greater than yourself? For a long time, I thought my life was defined by what I could prove to others. I wanted my father's nod of approval, my mother's gentle smile, my sister's reluctant acknowledgement. I believed that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, sacrificed enough sleep and comfort, they would finally see me. That was my quiet dream, that one day they would clap for me the way they clapped for Sophia. But the truth is, some people will never give you the validation you crave. Some families are so entangled in favoritism and control that no achievement can break through, and if you spend your life chasing their approval, you will lose yourself completely. It took nearly losing everything for me to learn that lesson. When I lay in that hospital bed listening to a nurse tell me my parents had said I brought it on myself, I felt a part of me shatter. But in that shattering, something else was born. A refusal, a decision. I would not wait anymore for love that was conditional for acceptance that never came. I would build my life on my own terms. And when I walked into that courtroom on crutches, hearing the silence ripple as people realized I was alive, I carried more than my own story. I carried the story of every person who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or betrayed by those they trusted most. Because family is supposed to be a place of safety, but for many it is the first battlefield. The betrayal cuts deeper because it comes from those who should have protected us. And healing means accepting that sometimes blood does not define loyalty. Choice does. That is why I created the foundation, not just as a way to give back, but as a way to say, I believe you. I see you. You are not alone. Not. Every survivor who walks through those doors carries a weight similar to mine, the weight of gaslighting, of silence, of being told they are nothing. And each time we offer them support, we lift a piece of that burden. Each time they stand in court and find their voice, it feels like another victory against the silence I once drowned in. What strikes me most is how many older women and men come to our events. People in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. They sit quietly at first listening. Then when they speak, the stories spill out decades of being overshadowed by a favored sibling, years of enduring a spouse's cruelty, while their children looked away, moments when they nearly gave up, but somehow kept going. They tell me they see themselves in my story, that it reminds them it is never too late to fight for dignity. Their resilience humbles me, and it reminds me that survival is not just for the young. It is for anyone who chooses to stand. Sometimes I think of Sophia in her cell pacing, perhaps remembering the life she once held. I do not rejoice in her downfall. I do not cheer her suffering, but I do feel a deep relief that the world finally saw her for what she was and that justice caught up to her. Consequences matter. They teach society that betrayal has a price. They remind every victim that their pain is valid, that the law can sometimes cut through the lies. And what about my parents? People often ask if I ever spoke to them again. The answer is no, because forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I can forgive them in my heart for my own peace, but I do not invite them back into my life. I do not open the door to those who closed theirs on me when I needed them most. And that, too, is a form of healing, choosing boundaries, choosing freedom. To anyone listening now, especially those who feel invisible in their own families, I want to say this. You are not defined by who ignores you, by who takes credit for your work, by who refuses to see your worth. You are defined by the strength you carry when you decide to stop waiting for them. By the moment you say enough, by the steps you take, however painful, toward reclaiming your voice. My story was built on betrayal, yes, but it ends with choice. I chose to fight. I chose to stand in that courtroom and speak the truth even when my legs shook and my heart pounded. I chose to cut ties that poisoned me. And I chose to build something new, something that now stands as proof that pain can be transformed into purpose. So as you sit here listening, ask yourself, what would you choose? If you were abandoned, if you were silenced, would you let it define you? Or would you rise even on broken legs and walk into the light of your own strength? The city skyline outside my window reminds me every night that life keeps moving, no matter how deep the scars. Lights flicker, trains rumble, voices drift through the air. I stand there, sometimes crutches now set aside, and I whisper to myself the words that carried me through. I am enough, and so are you.